February 12, 1945. A sea of mud and canvas on the outskirts of Düren, Germany. The air, thick with the smell of wet earth and coal smoke, carries the distant, percussive cough of artillery. For Captain Elias Vance, a surgeon with the 45th Field Hospital, it is the unending soundtrack to a war that has chewed its way across Europe and now feasts on the German heartland. He stands at the flap of the surgical tent, a tin mug of lukewarm coffee steaming in his cold hands, watching another M3 half-track slosh to a halt. Its tracks are caked in the thick, unforgiving mud of the Herdkin Forest campaign, a battle that has bled men and machines for months. This is the overflow, the human debris swept up in the latest push by the U.S. First Army. Prisoners. Sergeant Frank Gallo drops from the passenger side, his boots making a sucking sound as they hit the ground. He nods to Vance, his face a mask of weary resolve. More for the pen, Captain. Found him huddled in a cellar. Didn't even put up a fight. The tailgate drops with a groan of stressed metal. Out they come, a shuffling line of gray uniforms. Old men of the Volkssturm, boys who should be in school, and a handful of exhausted, hollow-eyed Wehrmacht soldiers. Vance's gaze sweeps over them with a practiced, detached eye, assessing for immediate medical needs. A limp, a blood-soaked bandage, the telltale pallor of shock. Then he sees her. She is last, helped down by a corporal. Perhaps 19, 20 at most. Her Luftwaffe gray greatcoat is too large, her face smudged with soot and streaked with grime. She isn't a soldier in the way the others are. She wears the uniform of a Flakhelferin, a female anti-aircraft auxiliary, one of the thousands of girls and young women pressed into service to defend the crumbling Reich. Her blonde hair is matted and tucked beneath a service cap. She doesn't look defiant or scared, merely empty, a vessel drained of everything but the cold. As the others are herded towards a makeshift processing area, she stumbles. The corporal catches her arm, but she leans heavily against the side of the half-track, her eyes closing for a moment. Vance takes a step forward, his medical instincts overriding the protocol of processing prisoners. "Sergeant, bring that one over here." Gallo gestures, and the corporal guides the young woman towards the medical tent. Her steps are uncertain, a strange, dragging shuffle, as if her boots are filled with lead. "What's the problem?" Vance asks, his voice calm, professional. He keeps his German simple, learned from medical texts and previous encounters. "Sind Sie verletzt? Are you injured?" The girl looks at him, her blue eyes wide and unfocused. She shakes her head slowly. "Nein, nur müde, just tired." It's the standard answer. They are all just tired. But Vance sees something else in her gait, a lack of control that goes beyond simple exhaustion. Let's get her inside, out of the wind. Inside the tent, the air is warmer, thick with the smells of antiseptic, canvas, and brewing coffee. A single generator hums outside, powering a few bare bulbs that cast long, dancing shadows. Vance directs her to a cot. She sits down heavily, her body seeming to collapse into itself. He kneels, his eyes scanning her legs, her boots. No obvious wounds. No torn fabric soaked with blood, but that's to be expected. Vance pulls a small reflex hammer from his medical bag. "I'm a doctor," he says again, tapping his own chest. "Arztst." He gently lifts the hem of her trousers to expose her knee. He taps the patellar tendon. Nothing. Not a flicker of movement. His brow furrows. He tries the other knee. Again, nothing. A cold knot tightens in his stomach. This is not fatigue. This is not shell shock. This is neurological. He looks up at her face. Her expression is still distant, but a sliver of fear is beginning to creep into her eyes. She understands that this is not normal. "Can you feel this?" he asks, taking a safety pin from his lapel and lightly pricking the sole of her foot. She stares at him, her lips slightly parted. She shakes her head. "9. He moves up, pricking her ankle, her calf, her thigh. Each time he watches her face, searching for a wince, a flinch, any sign of sensation. And each time, nothing. Her eyes remain fixed on his, the fear in them growing into a quiet, profound terror. He puts the pin away, his mind racing through the possibilities. A spinal fracture, a severe concussion, but there are no visible signs of trauma, no bruising on her back, no reported fall or impact. He stands up, his gaze locked with hers. He needs to know. He asks the question that hangs in the air between them, the question that will change everything. "Tell me what you feel in your legs, right now." She looks down at her own legs, two foreign objects lying on the cot. Her voice is barely a whisper, a fragile thing in the humming silence of the tent. "Ich kann meine Beine nicht fühlen." She pauses, then translates the words herself, her voice trembling as she gives them sound in his language. "I can't feel my legs." The words hang in the air, stark and absolute. Captain Vance feels a chill that has nothing to do with the February wind whipping against the canvas. He has seen men torn apart by machine guns, shattered by artillery, and ravaged by infection. He has pronounced men dead and sent others home in pieces. But this quiet, invisible injury, presenting itself in a seemingly unharmed young woman, feels deeply unsettling. It's a ghost in the machine. Sergeant Gallo, standing by the tent flap, shifts his weight, the concern visible on his face. This is no longer a routine prisoner intake. "All right," Vance says, his voice a low, steadying murmur, more for himself than for her. "Let's get you onto the examination table," gently. He and Gallo lift her, one at the shoulders, one at the legs. She is lighter than he expected, almost frail. As they place her on the steel table, her legs remain limp, useless. A thin wool blanket is all that separates her from the cold metal. Vance pulls a wheeled stool over and begins a more thorough examination. He needs a baseline. He needs facts. "What is your name?" he asks in German. Anneliese Schmidt." Her voice is a little stronger now, anchored by the simple fact of her own name. "Anneliese, I am Captain Vance. We are going to figure this out." He starts with her back, running his fingers down her spine, vertebra by vertebra. He is searching for deformity, swelling, a point of extreme tenderness, anything to indicate a fracture or dislocation. He presses firmly, methodically. "Does this hurt? Any pain here?" "9," she says to each press. Her back is a blank slate. There is no external sign of injury, no bruising, no cuts, no abrasions. It makes no sense. A spinal cord injury severe enough to cause complete bilateral paralysis and sensory loss should have a cause, a violent, obvious cause. He asks Gallo to help him turn her onto her back. He takes her legs and moves them himself, testing the range of motion in her hips, her knees, her ankles. There's no resistance, no locking, but also no corresponding muscle tone. They are just dead weight. He thinks back to the moment he saw her at the half-track. She was walking, wasn't she? A shuffle, yes, but she was moving. The paralysis must be recent, frighteningly recent. "Anneliese," he says, leaning closer so she can hear him clearly over the generator's drone. "Think back. When did you first notice this, the numbness?" She closes her eyes, her brow furrowed in concentration. "This morning, at the farmhouse, when we surrendered. I tried to stand up. My legs, they were clumsy, like wood." Her voice falters. "When we were in the truck, it got worse. I thought it was the cold." "Was there an explosion? A blast? Did you fall?" Vance presses, running through the checklist of trauma. She shakes her head, then hesitates. 2 days ago, the artillery. It was very close. The world was shaking. Noise, dirt everywhere. The blast threw me against the wall of the gun pit." Vance's eyes narrow. "This is it. This has to be it. A concussive force. Did anything hit you? Were you wounded?" "No, I don't think so. My ears were ringing. I had a headache. A cut on my arm." She gestures to a small healing scratch on her forearm, already scabbed over. "Everyone was yelling. We had to move. There was no time to think. No time to think. No time to notice a small puncture wound from a piece of flying metal, especially if the entry point was small and the bleeding minimal. Adrenaline is a powerful anesthetic. It could mask almost anything." He runs his hands over her back again, this time with a new purpose, feeling for the slightest bump, the smallest tear in her uniform he might have missed. He finds nothing. The shrapnel, if it's there, could be tiny, a sliver of steel moving at ballistic speeds. It wouldn't leave a crater. It would leave a pinprick. Vance stands up and paces the small space between the table and a stack of medical crates. The tent feels smaller, the air tighter. He is operating with 19th century tools to diagnose a 20th century wound. He needs to see inside her. The field hospital is well equipped for a forward unit, but it's not a state-of-the-art facility. They have surgical kits, plasma, sulfa drugs, and mountains of bandages. And they have one other thing, a piece of equipment usually reserved for severe compound fractures and locating bullets in chests and abdomens. It is temperamental, power-hungry, and their most valuable diagnostic tool. Vance stops pacing and turns to Sergeant Gallo. "Frank, go find Corporal Stevens. Tell him to get the generator for the Westinghouse gassed up and running. I want it warm in 5 minutes." Gallo's eyebrows shoot up. The Westinghouse field of Show unit is a beast, using it as a major undertaking, draining precious fuel and requiring the full attention of their only trained technician. It is not used lightly. "The X-ray captain? For a prisoner?" Vance's gaze is hard, unwavering. "She's not a prisoner right now, Sergeant. She's a patient with a suspected spinal injury of unknown origin that has progressed to paralysis in the last 3 hours. If we don't find out what's happening in there, she will never walk again. Now go." Gallo nods, the question erased from his face, replaced by grim understanding. "Yes, sir." He turns and disappears through the tent flap, his voice already audible outside, barking orders into the wind. Vance turns back to Anneliese. He sees the question in her eyes, the same one Gallo had. Why? Why go to this trouble for an enemy? He doesn't have a simple answer. All he knows is that a 19-year-old girl is lying on his table, her future dissolving with every passing minute. The war, the uniform, the politics, it all melts away, leaving only the fundamental equation of doctor and patient. And right now, Her patient is a black box, a mystery he has to solve. The X-ray is his only light. The hum of the primary tent generator is now joined by a deeper, more labored roar from outside. Corporal Stevens, a lanky radiographer from Pennsylvania, whose pre-war job was taking pictures at a department store, is coaxing the Westinghouse machine's dedicated generator to life. Inside, the surgical tent is a hive of controlled activity. Lieutenant Davis, a nurse with steady hands and an even steadier temperament, helps Vance and Gallo transfer Annalise from the examination table to a flat wooden board they can slide under the X-ray tube. The machine itself is an ugly, utilitarian assembly of steel arms, coiled cables, and a heavy, lead-lined emitter that looks more like a weapon than a healing tool. Annalise watches the proceedings with wide, frightened eyes. The strange, hulking apparatus being positioned over her, the urgent, low-toned English she doesn't understand, it all combines into a terrifying tableau. She is utterly powerless, a subject in a clinical drama she cannot comprehend. Vance pauses, leans down, and speaks to her in his careful German. "This machine lets me see your bones. It will not hurt. You must stay perfectly still. Verstehen?" She gives a small, jerky nod. He places a lead apron over her torso, protecting her vital organs from the radiation, a precaution that feels both profoundly necessary and strangely absurd in the middle of a war zone. "All right, Stevens, let's do it," Vance says, stepping back behind a portable lead screen with the nurse. "Lumbar spine, L1 to L5. Give me a good, clear plate." "You got it, Captain," Stevens calls back. He fiddles with the dials, adjusting the kilovoltage and exposure time based on the patient's estimated thickness. The calculations are a mix of science and guesswork. "Ready? Exposing now." There is a loud click, followed by a low-frequency buzz that seems to vibrate in the fillings of Vance's teeth. The air smells of ozone. The process takes several seconds that stretch into an eternity. Another click, and the buzzing stops. The moment of truth is now captured, invisible, on a glass plate housed in a light-proof cassette. Stevens carefully removes the cassette and carries it like a holy relic to the makeshift darkroom, a small, light-tight annex at the back of the tent. Vance follows him, his heart pounding a steady, anxious rhythm. This is where the ghost will either reveal itself or remain maddeningly hidden. The darkroom is cramped and smells of acetic acid and fixer. A single red safe light casts an infernal glow over everything. You can feel the tension in the small space. Stevens works with practiced efficiency, his hands moving in the chemical trays by feel alone. The gentle sloshing of the developer is the only sound. He speaks in a low murmur, narrating the process. "Plates in the soup. See what we got." Counting it down. Vance stares at the blank wall, his mind a whirlwind of differential diagnoses. Transverse myelitis, a spinal epidural abscess, unlikely to be so sudden. A vascular event, a stroke in the spinal cord. Possible, but the blast trauma keeps pulling his thoughts back to one thing: shrapnel. A tiny, hot piece of steel from a German 88 or an American 105. It didn't matter which. A stray fragment from the storm of metal that saturated every inch of this front. "Okay, Captain, here she comes." He lifts the dripping glass plate from the final rinse, its surface slick and gleaming in the red light. He holds it up to the safe light, and Vance leans in, his breath catching in his throat. There it is, a ghostly black and white map of her own skeleton. Vance's eyes trace the elegant, stacked column of the lumbar vertebrae. They appear intact. No obvious fractures, no compression, no visible damage to the bone structure itself. For a horrifying second, he thinks he was wrong, that the answer lies elsewhere, beyond his ability to find it here. And then he sees them. At first, they look like artifacts, imperfections in the film, but they are too sharp, too defined. 3 jagged white stars floating in the gray landscape of soft tissue. Foreign bodies. Metal. 2 of them are small, lodged harmlessly in the thick muscle of her lower back, miles away from anything critical. But the third is a different story. It is larger, a wicked-looking shard, perhaps half an inch long, and its location makes Vance's blood run cold. It is nestled deep, impossibly deep, resting against the lamina of the L2 vertebrae, the thin bony arch that forms the roof of the spinal canal. It is not in the canal itself, not yet, but it is touching the bone that protects the delicate bundle of nerves within, the cauda equina, the horse's tail of nerve roots that control all function in the lower body. Vance stares at the image, mesmerized and horrified. He can see the entire story now. The blast through her. The fragment, traveling with just enough energy, pierced her heavy greatcoat and uniform, slid through the muscle, and came to rest against her spine. The initial impact would have been a shock, a deep bruise, but the nerves were likely only jostled. For 2 days it sat there, dormant. But the jostling of the half-track ride, the simple act of sitting and standing, it must have caused the fragment to shift. A millimeter, maybe less, but it was enough. Enough to press against the bone, to inflame the surrounding tissue, to exert a terrifying, silent pressure on the spinal cord itself. The numbness wasn't from the initial impact. It was happening now, in real time. The fragment was a ticking bomb, and every movement, every breath, could be the one that pushed it that final catastrophic millimeter. Stevens, sensing the gravity of the captain's silence, whispers, "God almighty, is that what I think it is?" Vance doesn't answer. He takes the wet, cold plate from Stevens' hands, his eyes still locked on the shard of metal. It is a whisper away from severing her connection to the lower half of her body, permanently. He can't send her back to a rear hospital. The journey alone could paralyze her for life. He can't leave it in. The pressure is already doing its damage. The terrible, inescapable conclusion settles over him with the weight of a shroud. It had to come out. Here. Now. In a tent in the middle of a war, with the sound of artillery as his surgical soundtrack. Captain Vance steps out of the dark room, the X-ray plate held carefully in his hand. The red glow of the safe light gives way to the harsh yellow glare of the tent's spare bulbs. He holds the plate up for Lieutenant Davis and Sergeant Gallo to see. The shadows on the glass tell a story more terrifying than any external wound. "Look here," Vance says, his voice low and tight. He points a finger at the bright, jagged shape poised menacingly over the ghostly outline of the vertebra. "This is our problem. A piece of shrapnel. It's sitting right on the L2 lamina. It's not in the spinal canal, but it's close enough to be compressing the cord through the bone and surrounding tissue. That's why she's losing feeling. The pressure is cutting off the nerve signals." Lieutenant Davis, a veteran of the Normandy landings, lets out a soft, sharp breath. "So close. Too close," Vance corrects. "It has to come out. If it shifts even slightly, it could sever the cord or cause permanent damage from the pressure alone. We can't move her. The journey to a proper hospital in Aachen or Liège would be too risky." Sergeant Gallo looks from the X-ray to the cot where Annalise lies, watching them, her face a pale oval of fear. "You mean you're going to do it here, Captain?" "There's no other choice," Vance replies, his decision already made. The sheer audacity of it hangs in the air. This isn't a simple debridement or an amputation, the bloody, straightforward butchery that makes up most of their work. This is spinal surgery, a delicate, precise, and unforgiving procedure, typically performed in a sterile operating theater with a full team and specialized instruments. He would be doing it in a canvas tent pitched in mud, with a basic surgical kit and the rumble of distant tons for an audience. "Davis," he commands, shifting into a purely professional tone, "I need our best surgical set. Everything sterilized twice. Get extra silk sutures, hemostats, and the giggly saw, just in case we need to cut through bone. And get the plasma ready to hang. Frank, I need you to prep the patient. Get her onto her stomach. We'll have to use local anesthetic. A full spinal block is too dangerous, and putting her under completely without a proper anesthesiologist is a risk I don't want to take." The team moves with the fluid efficiency of long practice. There are no more questions, only action. While Gallo and Davis prepare, Vance walks over to Annalise. He crouches beside the cot, the X-ray plate still in his hand. He needs her to understand. He needs her to be still. Her cooperation is not just helpful, it is essential to her survival. "Annalise," he begins in German, his voice gentle but firm. "We found the problem. You have a small piece of metal inside your back. It is pressing on your nerves. This is why you cannot feel your legs. Do you understand?" She nods, tears welling in her eyes and tracing clean paths through the grime on her cheeks. "I have to take it out," he continues. "We have to do it right now. I will give you medicine so you feel no pain, but you will be awake. It is very important that you lie perfectly still. Can you do that for me?" The terror in her eyes is immense, but beneath it there is a flicker of trust. She is an enemy prisoner, he is an American officer, but in this moment those identities are meaningless. He is the only person who can save her, and she knows it.
She gives another small, determined nod. The next half hour is a blur of meticulous preparation. Annalise is positioned face down on the operating table, her head turned to one side. Gallo swabs a wide area of her back with pungent brown iodine. Lieutenant Davis lays out a gleaming array of instruments on a sterile cloth. Scalpels, forceps, retractors, probes. The metallic clinking sounds unnaturally loud in the tense silence. Vance scrubs his hands raw, then pulls on a pair of thin rubber gloves. He fills a syringe with Novocaine, the local anesthetic. This will be the most difficult part for her. He approaches the table. You will feel a series of sharp stings now, he warns her. Like a bee. Try not to move. He begins injecting the anesthetic, creating a field of numbness around the projected location of the incision. Annalise flinches with each needle prick, her body tensing, a small gasp escaping her lips, but she does not cry out. She lies rigid, her hands gripping the edges of the table, her knuckles white. She is holding on, fighting to remain still as he asks. When the area is numb, Vance takes his position. He looks at Davis, who gives him a sharp, confident nod. He glances at Gallo, who is monitoring Annalise's pulse and breathing. Everything is as ready as it will ever be. He picks up the number 10 scalpel. The steel feels cold and familiar in his hand. He positions the tip over the iodized skin of her lower back, using the X-ray, now clipped to a stand, as his map. He visualizes the path, through skin, fat, and the thick lumbar fascia, parting the long erector spiny muscles, down to the cold, hard surface of the vertebra. He pictures the fragment, the dark invader he is hunting. The entire world shrinks to the small patch of skin beneath his blade. The artillery, the war, the mud, the canvas tent, it all fades into a distant hum. There is only the patient, the problem, and the edge of the knife. He takes a breath, holds it, and presses the blade to her skin.
The scalpel parts the skin in a clean, bloodless line, the Novocaine doing its work. Captain Vance is in his element now, the external chaos replaced by an internal state of intense, unwavering focus. This is a journey through living anatomy, a delicate and dangerous exploration. He works quickly but without haste, using retractors to pull back the layers of muscle, exposing the deeper tissues. Lieutenant Davis is at his side, swabbing away the blood that wells up, keeping the field of view clear. The air is thick with the coppery smell of it. Annalise is unnervingly still beneath the sterile drapes. Her breathing is shallow but steady. She has retreated deep inside herself, a silent partner in the fight for her own future. Deeper, Vance murmurs to himself, his voice a low hum. Following the spinous process. He uses a probe, its metal tip scraping softly against bone. He is navigating by feel and by the ghostly map of the X-ray. The back muscles are thick and powerful, and he must carefully separate their fibers, not cut them, to minimize damage and speed recovery. It is like dissecting a tightly wound rope. Time seems to warp in the bubble of concentration around the operating table. Minutes stretch and feel like hours. The only sounds are the clink of instruments, Vance's quiet commands, and the distant, rhythmic thunder of the war. Then he feels it, a subtle grating sensation transmitted through the steel probe, something that is not bone. "I've got it," he says, his voice tight. "I'm on it." He exchanges the probe for a pair of forceps. This is the most critical moment. He cannot simply grab and pull. The fragment is wedged against the bone, its sharp edges a direct threat to the surrounding nerves and blood vessels. A clumsy movement could cause the very damage he is trying to prevent. He has to gently, painstakingly, work it free from the tissue that has begun to grow around it in the past 48 hours. You are holding your breath, watching him. You can see the beads of sweat on his forehead, tracing paths around his surgical mask. His hands, illuminated by the harsh overhead light, are rock steady. He nudges the fragment with the tip of the forceps. It doesn't move. He applies a little more pressure, trying to grasp one of its edges. It shifts, a microscopic movement that causes Annalise to let out a sharp, involuntary gasp. "Hold her," Vance snaps. Gallo places a firm, steadying hand on her shoulder. "Pain?" Vance asks in German, his heart hammering against his ribs. "No, just a feeling," she whispers, her voice strained. "Like electricity. In my hip. A nerve." He brushed a nerve. Vance pulls back for a second, forcing himself to take a slow, deep breath. The jolt she felt is a terrifying sign of how close he is to the vital structures, but it is also a good sign. A sign that the nerve is still alive, still capable of sending a signal. He has to get the fragment out. Now. He repositions the forceps, changing the angle of his approach. This time, he manages to get a firm grip on a protruding edge of the metal. He doesn't pull. Instead, he begins to rock it, gently, back and forth, trying to loosen its grip in the fascia. It is like trying to pull a rotten tooth with deep roots. For a tense, agonizing moment, it holds fast. Then, with a slight, sickening pull, it gives. Slowly,
millimeter by millimeter, Vance draws the piece of shrapnel out of the wound. It emerges into the light, a dark, ugly piece of steel, stained with blood. It is misshapen, sharp-edged, an agent of pure chaos. He drops it into a metal kidney dish, where it lands with a sharp clatter that echoes the finality of the act. A collective sigh of relief goes through the small group around the table. The threat is gone. Now, all that's left is the damage it caused. Vance meticulously inspects the cavity, ensuring no small fragments remain, before beginning the long process of closing the wound, stitching together muscle, fascia, and finally skin. His movements are efficient, his sutures neat and clean. He is a carpenter repairing a house that has been violated. When the last stitch is tied and the bandage is in place, the tension in the tent finally breaks. Gallo wipes his brow. Davis begins cleaning the instruments. Vance pulls off his gloves and mask, his face etched with exhaustion. He walks to Annalise's head. She turns to look at him, her eyes clouded with pain, fear, and a dawning, fragile hope. "It's over," he says softly. "The metal is out." He waits a few moments, letting her absorb the news. Then, for the final, crucial test, he moves to her feet. He picks up the safety pin again. He knows it may be too soon. The nerves have been under pressure, bruised and inflamed. It could take days, even weeks, for the signals to get through again, if they ever do completely. He holds her left foot, his touch gentle. "Annalise," he says, "tell me what you feel." He pricks the sole of her foot with the pin. He watches her face, expecting the same blank lack of response as before. But this time is different. Her brow furrows, her lips part. A single choked sob escapes her. I feel it," she whispers. Tears streaming down her face now, not of fear, but of overwhelming relief. "It hurts." It is the most beautiful word Vance has ever heard. He moves to her toes, gently pinching the smallest one. Can you try to move this for me?" Her face contorts with effort. Her entire body is focused on that one tiny command. And on her foot, almost imperceptibly at first, the little toe gives a faint, spastic twitch. It's not much. It is the barest flicker of life. But it is a signal, a message sent from her brain down the bruised but unbroken highway of her spinal cord. A message that has finally, miraculously, arrived at its destination. Captain Elias Vance stands up, a wave of profound weariness and profound satisfaction washing over him. He looks at the young German woman on his table, a life nearly shattered, now given a millimeter of hope. He looks at the ugly shard of metal in the dish, a piece of a shell fired in hatred, that has been defeated by an act of determined humanity. In the heart of the war's relentless destruction, for one brief moment, something has been saved.